What does it mean to truly be of a community? This is the essential question behind social inclusion for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We know that being part of a community involves two things: relationships and social activities, or a combination of those. We don't know exactly what's involved because we don't exactly know how to measure social inclusion. But basically, social inclusion is those things that make us feel connected to our world, aside from where we live, work, and learn. It's how we play, it's who we love, it's how we express our friendship. It's all these things that make life really connected. So I want to tell you about social inclusion by telling you about Steve. He is a person with IDD. Steve loves baseball. He spends a lot of his time in the evening watching baseball on television. He has a favorite team, he follows them, he knows the players, he knows the stats. He loves his baseball. Unfortunately, watching it on TV is really a solitary, sedentary activity most of the time. And this is really typical of people with IDD. They spend much of their time in solitary, sedentary activities. We also know that it's really hard for them to get out into more active things. The normal person with an intellectual or developmental disability typically gets out about twice a month. And usually none of those times out are with a person without a disability. Further, we know that the typical person with IDD has about 11 people in his or her social network, and that only 2 of those are people without IDD. This makes for a very, very small opportunity to get out, especially if we're not going to go out with other people with IDD, staff, or family. We also know that Steve loves to go to church. His faith is extremely important to him, and he usually goes to church only on weekends when he goes home with his family. Here, his mom and dad are with him at church. We know the church is really important to both people with IDD and their family members, so it's important that they go together. However, going together means that Steve can really only go about once a month when he goes home with his parents, and he would like to go more. Steve also has a girlfriend. Lucky guy, here she is. Mostly, Steve talks to her on the phone. They have long, long conversations about who knows what. We know that it's very, very difficult for people with IDD to really engage in these more intimate relationships. There are a number of reasons for this, but it's hard to meet. If you live far apart and you don't have transportation, it's really hard to spend time together. Secondly, relationships like this are only supported some of the time. We know that direct support workers rate their direct care tasks much more highly than they rate their social inclusion tasks. We also know that family members of people with IDD tend to support intimate relationships as long as they don't get into more sexual territory. Now we're going to enter Steve's dream world, a very, very different world from the one in which he lives. In Steve's dream world, he joins a baseball league. We know from prior research that people with IDD, when they're engaged in sports activities or other leisure activities with people without disabilities, that they tend to build relationships, they tend to break down barriers, and change the attitudes of the community members with whom they're playing. This is great news for Steve. He joined the baseball league, now he has fans, he's hitting home runs, and he's really being a part of this community that shares his love for baseball. Steve has also been going to church more often. He found someone else in his neighborhood who goes to the same church. This is really great news for Steve because he loves spaghetti and he's getting invites even now to the spaghetti dinners. And love is in the air. We know that people with IDD experience love in similar ways as people without disabilities. And because his DSPs have been trained to attend to his social needs more often, Steve is now getting out with his girlfriend a lot more. This is really great news. People with intellectual disabilities experience intimate relationships much in the same way as anyone else. And there's also evidence that shows that they're aware of issues like anatomy and pregnancy, which would lead them to be responsible sexually as well, although the support for that sexual engagement is still lagging behind. So this sounds great for Steve, but what do we need to do in order to make this happen? There are 3 things that I think we can start to focus on. First of all, we need to measure and define social inclusion much better than we currently do. Right now, we have various definitions, and we have no real way to measure consistently. In the absence of that, it's very, very difficult to know what works to support inclusion and what doesn't. We can also learn to scale up interventions that we know work well, and then measure the effects of those. So the congregational inclusion that I told you about before is from a program that has actually been shown to have some success in including people with disabilities in their faith communities. Other programs have shown that it's effective to bring people with intellectual disabilities into sporting events and other leisure activities. But these have all been on small scale. If we can scale those up, measure them to see how they're really working in including people with intellectual disabilities in their communities, we'll be on the track to really improving inclusion. Finally, we need better policy for social inclusion. The United States has done a good job in supporting community living for people with IDD. It's done an adequate job of supporting employment for people with IDD, but the support for social inclusion has been lacking. In fact, the new CMS final rule on community living only makes one mention of social relationships, and we need to do better than that if we're going to truly make people of their communities. Finally, Steve and I would like to say see ya. But my question is, will you be seeing Steve? This will take a lot of changes from all of us, and a lot of effort in order to make social inclusion truly a part of who we are as a community. So my challenge is, please join me on this journey to include people as members of their society, not just members in their society. Thank you very much.